मुख्य वक्ता जी हैं समनी चैतन्य प्रज्ञा जी, उनका मैं संक्षिप्त परिचय देना चाहूँगा। आप अभी वर्तमान में विजिटिंग प्रोफेसर हैं फ्लोरिडा इंटरनेशनल यूनिवर्सिटी मियामी में। इसके पहले आप जैन विश्वभारती लाडनू राजस्थान में फॉर्मर हेड ऑफ डिपार्टमेंट जैनोलॉजी एंड कंपैरेटिव रिलीजन एंड कल्चर, रिलीजन एंड फिलोसॉफी, इसकी आप हेड रह चुकी हैं। इसके साथ ही आप फॉर्मर डायरेक्टर भगवान महावीर इंटरनेशनल रिसर्च सेंटर की आप डायरेक्टर भी रह चुकी हैं और आपकी अनेक पुस्तकें प्रकाशित हो चुकी हैं। आप आचार्य महाश्रमण जी जो 11वें आचार्य हैं श्वेतांबर तेरा पंथ के, उनकी आप शिष्या हैं और आपकी जो स्पेशलाइजेशन के एरिया हैं वो जैनिज्म, कंपैरेटिव रिलीजन, कंपैरेटिव फिलोसॉफी, मेडिटेशन एंड स्पिरिचुअलिटी, नॉन वायलेंस, साइंस ऑफ लिविंग, संस्कृत एंड प्राकृत लैंग्वेज है। आपकी 2015 में एक पुस्तक प्रकाशित हुई जैनिज्म इन मॉडर्न टाइम्स। 2017 में दूसरी पुस्तक प्रकाशित हुई साइंटिफिक पर्सपेक्टिव्स ऑफ जैनिज्म। 2018 में एक तीसरी पुस्तक हुई जैन फिलोसॉफी ए साइंटिफिक अप्रोच टू रियलिटी। इसके बाद 2020 में एक पुस्तक प्रकाशित हुई जैनिज्म ऑन मॉडर्न इश्यूज। इस तरह से आपका काफी काम आप करती हैं। आप अनेक रिसर्च प्रोजेक्ट से भी जुड़ी हुई हैं। इस प्रकार से आप निरंतर जैन धर्म की सेवा, जैन समाज की सेवा और अनेक प्रकार के शोध कार्य भी करती रहती हैं। आपका जो है फिलॉसफी में अच्छा निष्णातता है, कुशलता है, इसलिए आज हम सब के बीच आप उपस्थित हैं। हम बहुत सौभाग्यशाली समझ रहे हैं अपने आप को कि आज हम आपका व्याख्यान हमें सुनने मिलेगा। और इतना ही मैं आपका परिचय देने के बाद आपसे निवेदन करूंगा कि आप अपना जो भी उद्बोधन है हमारे लिए प्रदान करें। धन्यवाद।
Namo Jnanam. First of all, I pay my deep respect and homage to the enlightened souls of all Jain traditions. And I also pay respect to my most revered Guru, Acharya Sri Mahashamanji. I am very much thankful to all the organizers who have invited me for this special talk. As Supriya Rai has said that Buddhist studies and Sanskrit studies and Jain studies all are the part of Indian culture. So they must be the part of one of the department and not separate. So that is true. We are learning from each other and we are working together from centuries. And all these Indian traditions have influence on each other. So unless we understand all the three, we cannot understand the Indian culture as a whole. So to have the integrated study of Indian culture means to have the integrated knowledge of Indian culture. So it is true. Just we have to see that today's topic, which has been chosen by me, is consciousness, and it is also very common in all Indian traditions. And we can say it is the core of all Indian traditions. Without it, there is no Indian philosophy, no Indian religion. All religious practices are what we say revolving around this consciousness. So just we have to say that what is consciousness? So we can say that the soul is the main core concept of Indian philosophical systems, whether it is Hinduism, whether it is Buddhism, whether it is Jainism. Though in Buddhism is interpreted, the concept of soul is interpreted in Buddhism in a very different manner, and that's why it is a kind of disagreement among all Indian traditions. But we have to understand that Buddha also accepted the concept of rebirth, and thereby he has also accepted the eternality of soul or self in some way, whether directly or indirectly. So soul is the main concept of Indian culture, all Indian traditions. We can define this concept of soul in a different ways, from mythological, from theological point of view, or from ethical point of view. So that's why these traditions differ in that manner, that how they are addressing this issue of the self. Today we are taking such a topic which is very common and has been being very common between the science and also philosophy. The scientists are focusing especially to understand the concept of consciousness. And I have thought that this concept of consciousness is very much ingrained or deeply rooted in Indian philosophies. So we have to expose this concept of consciousness in true sense, in philosophical sense, to the world, so that the world of science can also understand what consciousness is. What they are understanding is very similar to Indian way of thinking, or they are thinking in some different line. And we have to draw a line which can be common to both of the traditions, both of the branches of knowledge, and how they can come in agreement and can work together for better humanity, for better world. And that was my main point. I have chosen this topic of consciousness. So just I want to share my screen to discuss the whole concept of consciousness in Jain tradition. So I think the screen is visible to everybody. Yes. Okay. So there is a question that what is the definition of consciousness, how it is structured in our soul, what is its main function, and what are the cognitive theories? Because recently we have seen that there are so many cognitive theories which are coming. And are they different from consciousness, the function of consciousness, or they are also the part of consciousness? So we have to understand all these different things in this context of consciousness. This concept of consciousness has become so relevant today to understand and to go into deeper study, because the scientists are focusing on it to resolve so many problems of the scientific studies. So we can see that many renowned scientists have come to the conclusion that every phenomena in the universe cannot be explained just by physical processes involving matter, and thus there is a need to think beyond matter. This list of scientists includes several Nobel laureates, and we quote a few of them here to strengthen the point. So there are so many scientists who are Nobel laureates and are thinking about consciousness. Among them, the 5 I have quoted here. The first is Schrödinger, who was the physics Nobel laureate. And he writes that mind has erected the objective outside world of the natural philosopher out of its own stuff. So they are thinking that there is something different from the physical matter. The Winger, physics Nobel laureate, he remarks, we are not machines. If man were a machine, then it should be possible to describe him in terms of atoms and molecules. And I don't think that is possible. So Winger also mentions that consciousness is a non-physical entity. So in this way, they are. He's also thinking or supposing that there is something different from matter which is existing in the world. And the next is Josephson. He is also physics Nobel laureate. And he writes that thus Bohm views quantum mechanics as providing an indication that there is unobserved order in nature. This now connects back to what I was saying much earlier. That is, that if we want to put God into science, then we have to say there is an intelligence behind the scenes, which is creating order, or at least leaving things less ordered than they would have been without the intelligence being present. And then George Wald, he also says that there is something beyond, which is called consciousness, and which can be said as a Brahman. And Albert Einstein, he also says that I also believe in the theory of Spinoza's theory of God. So these are different Nobel laureates which have been in 20th century and 21st century, and we have found that all these are of the same opinion, that there must be something non-physical or conscious entity apart from the material entities in the universe. And without understanding that, we cannot resolve so many problems which are coming up or popping up in the field of science. So they have concentrated on this theory of consciousness, and they are thinking that consciousness is something awareness, consciousness is something neural function. But when we go into a deeper study of Indian culture and the Indian concept of consciousness, then we find that consciousness is not just awareness. Consciousness is not just a neural function, but it is something more and deeper. And what it is, so we have to understand here that in Jainism, the concept of soul is very much ingrained in behind and what we say associated behind or working behind all different metaphysical, ethical, and epistemological theories. So it is very deeply rooted in Jainism, and we find there are three parallel words which are used to indicate or to go into deeper study for consciousness, and those three main terms, or we can say most usable terms, are Chaitana. The more ancient word for Chaitana is Upayoga, and the third word is Jnana. All these three words are interchangeable, or sometimes they slightly differ from each other, but all are same. So we see that these three terms are used in Jainism from very beginning. Whenever we discuss the theory of soul, we have to understand what is Upayoga, what is Chaitana, what is Gyan, how soul works or functions, or how we can know soul, that there is soul, because soul is something non-physical element. We cannot directly access through our senses to such kind of what we say abstract realities or non-physical realities. So there must be some way to access to such non-physical realities, and that is Chaitana or consciousness, through which we can know that that such something is a living entity or something which is devoid of consciousness or non-living entity. So this is only the consciousness is only the defining characteristic of soul, which distinguishes soul from non-soul or non-physical elements. So this is the main characteristic of soul, and that's why it is eternal, as the soul is eternal, because it is the fundamental characteristic, defining characteristic of soul, and soul is eternal, and that's why consciousness is also eternal. So in Buddhism, we find the concept of Alaya Vigyan, or in Hinduism, we find the knowledge of Ishwar, which is Nitya, which is eternal. So we can say that consciousness is something eternal consciousness. It is something eternal, power of living entities. So there is one definition which has been given in the scripture and which is known as Bhagavati Sutra, or in short, we can say Bhagavati. And it is said that Oglakhanenam Jive. Whenever we try to know what soul is, then it is said that if you want to know what soul is or what Brahman is, then you have to understand what consciousness is. Because through consciousness or through cognitive behavior only, you can identify something which is living or which is soul. So consciousness is the defining characteristic, and through which we can know the soul, which is non-physical or non-material or abstract reality. So it is inalienable characteristic of all souls, whether it is the soul of God, whether it is soul of common living being. So it may be developed or undeveloped state, especially in the living, those worldly living beings are there in the world, they are having consciousness, the same consciousness, but it is covered by the karmic matter. And that's why it is not fully developed as the God has. So that is the difference between the fully developed soul or realized soul or godly soul and the common living beings. This is called, there are so many different karmic matters which cover our power of consciousness, and especially in Jainism, it is said that there are three main karmic principles or karmic matters or karmas, which are responsible to affect our consciousness, and they are Jnana-varni, Darshana-varni, and Mohaniya. So Jnana-varni and Darshana-varni, these two karmas, they are responsible to cover our consciousness, and because of that, we are unable to see all the realities together or all the different modes of realities together. We can identify one or two or three, but not all at a time. So these are the main karmic materials which are affecting our consciousness to have the access of reality in totality. And the Mohani is a kind of a karma which dilutes our consciousness. And because of that, sometimes we see the reality, but we get wrong reflection of the reality. We understand reality is something different what it is. So this is the Mohani karma which dilutes our consciousness and which dilutes our consciousness, and because of that we get wrong knowledge, wrong perception of the things, and we cannot understand what reality is in actuality. So that is, these are the different karmic materials which affects our consciousness, and because of that we cannot know all the realities, or we cannot know the realities as such. So these are main things we have to understand why the consciousness of a common living being is not up to the fullest form. It is because of the karmic effect on consciousness. Though the knowledge, the lowest knowledge is found in according to Jainism, there are so many different types of living beings in the world. And the most lowest level of consciousness, if you want to find, you can find in a living being which is known as Nigoda. Today's, you can say that these are the bacteria. The smallest bacteria which have consciousness, the same consciousness as the God has, but it is least developed consciousness. So they have consciousness very in the smallest proportion, and that's why they cannot know many more things what a developed consciousness can know. Now we have to see that what is the relation between the consciousness and soul. So I have already said that this is the consciousness is the defining characteristic of soul, and that's why soul is an entity and consciousness is its characteristic or a quality. So both have relation as substance and quality relations. They have relation of substance and quality. So one is substance and other one is quality. And it is always, we know that substance is eternal and its quality is also equally eternal. And that's why in a very famous text of Jain epistemology, and which is known as Nandi Sutra, which is one of the scriptures, and it is fully devoted for the discussion, deep discussion on different functions of consciousness as a theory of knowledge, in which it is said that Savva Jivanam Piyanam Akharasa Anantamo Bhavo Nichuharyo Jai Punaso Vi Avarija Tena Jivo Ajivatam Pavicha. It is said that a consciousness is found in every living being, whether it is the smallest microbe or whether it is God. In all the living beings, the same consciousness is found, and at least the infinite part of consciousness is always awakened in all living beings, whether it is micro, whether it is higher species. And if this kind of knowledge or consciousness is also covered by the karmic matter, then there would not be any difference between the living and non-living. And that's why it never happens. Living would always be living and non-living would always be non-living. Because of the consciousness, the living entities will always behave like the cognitive, it must have some cognitive behavior, and that will show that it is always living and not non-living. And it will, it's that proportion, the least development of consciousness would always be uncovered in the microbe even. So you can see that microbe would also behave differently in comparison to non-living entities. And it is not, it cannot be easily measured or quantified, because it is consciousness which can change any time. So it is very difficult to have some fixed parameter or measurements to understand the conscious behavior. So this is the one thing which we have seen, that in all the living beings, there must be at least the infinite part of consciousness always awakened. Now we would see that sometimes it is said that consciousness and soul both are so similar that they are understood in terms of each other, and sometimes soul and consciousness both become the synonymous to each other. So it is in the Acharya Sutra, especially when you read Acharya Sutra, you will find that Mahavir speaks in the same language. He says that the Je Aya Se Vinaya, Je Vinaya Se Aya, Jain Vijanati Se Aya. It means one who knows is soul, and one who through which one knows is soul. It means knowledge or consciousness is soul, and soul is knowledge or consciousness. You cannot separate these two phenomena, though they are different in some sense, but still they are inseparable concepts. They are inseparable phenomena. They are inseparable realities. Substance and qualities cannot be separate from each other, and that's why they are interchangeable, or they can be understood in terms of each other. Levels of consciousness. When we go into deeper study of consciousness, then we find in Jainism there are two types of theories of consciousness, or there are two types of levels of consciousness. One is called a sensory level, and other one is called a extrasensory level. So in sensory level, we can say this is also a kind of mediate knowledge or indirect knowledge, indirect approach to understand reality. So there are two types of sensory or mediate or indirect knowledge, which are known as matigya, that is called perceptual cognition, and other one is shrutagyan, that is articulate knowledge. There is extrasensory knowledges too, and they can also be said as immediate or direct, Why they are immediate or direct? Because according to Jainism, it is the soul which is direct source of knowledge. Through senses or through mind, we know many more things, but senses and mind are only the instrument to know the external realities. But they are not the direct source of knowledge. It is the consciousness which is working through senses and mind and getting access to the external realities. So they are just instruments. They are playing the role of instruments and not the original source of knowledge. That's why the knowledge which we are getting through senses and mind is a kind of sensory knowledge or immediate knowledge or indirect knowledge, while the knowledge which we are getting through soul directly, that comes under the extrasensory knowledge. And there are three types of extrasensory knowledge. One is called Avadhi, and the second is called Manal-Paryaya, and the third one is called Kevala. We will go into detail in the next slides. Now we would see that there are functions of consciousness. So what kind of functions we perceive? All these different types of consciousness which are working at sensory level and extrasensory level. And these all consciousness are functioning in two ways. One is called perception, which is called technically known as darshan, and the other one is knowledge, which is called jnana. So it means the consciousness has two main functions. One is for perception, means to see the realities, and the second is knowledge, means to analyze the reality. So we have power of analyzing any realities. We have also power of perceiving any reality. All these different knowledge which we have discussed under the sensory and extrasensory knowledge, they are also divided into various categories. Once we have to see that there are two types of knowledge. One is called the right knowledge, other one is called wrong knowledge or perverted knowledge. So whenever we see the reality as it is, then it comes under the right knowledge. But when we see the reality but get wrong reflection of it, then it comes under the perverted knowledge. And there is another thing, which is a perception, in which we just perceive the things without any going into any analysis or any detail. Then it comes under the perception theory. So we would see that there is one theory in Jainism which is called Upayoga, and under the Upayoga there are 15 types of knowledges are discussed. All these knowledges are categorized into two ways. One is knowledge and other one is perception. In knowledge, there are two types of knowledge. One is right knowledge and other one is the wrong or perverted knowledge. So when we see the right knowledge, under the right knowledge, there are 5 types of knowledge: perceptual cognition, articulate knowledge, clairvoyance, mind reading, and omniscience. And when we discuss about the perverted knowledge, in the perverted knowledge also we find 3 types of knowledge which are called perverted knowledge. So that is called perverted knowledge of perceptual cognition, perverted knowledge of articulate knowledge, and perverted knowledge of clairvoyance. And there are 4 types of perception theory, which is called visual perception, non-visual perception, clairvoyant perception, and omniperception. So all these 5 types of knowledge, we would see that what kind of knowledge we get. Before we going into detail of each of the theories, we have to understand that there is another theory of knowledge or consciousness, which is called Paśyatā. And in this particular Paśyatā theory, also the 4 types of knowledge: first, the articulate knowledge, clairvoyance, mind reading, and omniscience. Except the perceptual cognition, all are taken under the Paśyatā theory. And what is the difference between the Upayoga theory and Paśyatā theory? So in the Upayoga theory, the knowledge all the different types of knowledge can know only the present things, past things, and future also. But sometimes it may be that due to limitation of our sensory powers, we can know only whatever is present before the eyes. But in the Paśyatā theory, whenever we use any kind of knowledge, that knowledge must have the capacity to know the present reality, the past reality, and the future reality. So that's why this Paśyatā theory has some speciality in comparison to Upayoga theory. We would see that there are certain knowledge which are found even the microbes or bacteria, and which is available in all the lower species also. And this can be said as the least knowledge which is found in the all living beings, and they are recognized as Samjñā. So they can also be said as instinctive knowledge or innate tendencies or inner urges, which are found by birth. They are not learned instincts, they are obtained by birth. So there are 10 types of instincts. One is called aha, second is bhai, then maithun, parikra, and krodh. Man, maya, lobh, lok, og. So you will find that some of the instincts are related to our emotional states or our physical needs. And there are last two, lok and og, Samjñā, they are the function of our consciousness, which is not dependent on any learning, but that knowledge is also innate. Without learning by birth, we get such kind of minimum knowledge, and due to that, we have some special tendency and also some general tendency. So those knowledges are also found in all the living beings. They are very common. Now we are coming to each of the knowledge theory, which is called perceptual cognition, mati gyan. And we know that in perceptual cognition, there are two types of knowledge. One is quasi-linguistic, and another one is non-linguistic. So quasi-linguistic has again 4 types of knowledges or 4 stages. One is sensation, speculation, judgment, and retention. And non-linguistic knowledge has 4 types of knowledge. One is called intellect of instantaneous comprehension. Second is intellect born of faithful service. Third is intellect developed by practical experience. And fourth is intellect of a mature experience. They are called intellect or buddhi, 4 types of buddhis. So, Utpatti ki buddhi, Vainai ki buddhi, Karmi ki buddhi, and Parinami ki buddhi. So, in this way, we find that there are 341 types of perceptual cognitions. And perceptual cognitions are related to our sensory knowledges. 5 types of senses we have, and mind, which is the 6th sense. Through all these 6 senses, whatever knowledge we get, that come or that fall under the perceptual cognition. We can see that we all our senses have very much capacity to know its object. So eyes can see the things which are far, which may be at very long distance, very far distance, and that can be at 1 lake huge distance. So that much power we have, but we are not using the full power of our senses. The ear has the power to hear the words or sounds which is coming even from 12 yojan distance. The nose, tongue, and skin can know their objects from the distance of 12 yojans, 9 yojans, and they can also hear or listen, smell from things from very long distance if it is coming by converting. So these are different types of capacities which our senses have, and we can know many more things, but we are not using our own capacity which we are having at present. There are articulate knowledge, which is known as Shruta Jnana, and there are 14 types of Shruta Jnana. One is called linguistic symbols. So whatever I am speaking and you are listening, that comes under the first category, that is called linguistic symbols, in which we use some symbols or some language to communicate our ideas or our thoughts or our things to others. Rational beings. We humans are rational beings. We come under the rational beings, and whatever we think in the language or in the particular terminology, so that kind of thinking comes under the rational beings knowledge of articulate knowledge of rational beings. Authentic knowledge. There are certain knowledge books or scriptures we are having, and that much they are having very right data or right studies of things. So any right studies which we get from any source, that comes under the authentic knowledge, that which has a beginning. There are certain researches and studies which are coming with time. So those studies are having right content or right data, and they have also beginning. That's why they come under this category. That which is with an aid. It may be that there are certain knowledges which are just relevant for the time, particular time, and after that they become outdated. So that come under the fifth category. The sixth is scriptures having analogical passages. So there are certain scriptures which are having the same terminology, same expression. There are certain words are changed, otherwise the whole sentence is the same. So these scriptures come under this sixth category related to the inner corpus of the Jain scriptures. So we know that Jain scriptures are divided into two categories. One is inner corpus and the other one is the outer corpus. So those scriptures come under the inner corpus. They are related to this seventh category. And just opposite to all these seven, we find another seven types of cognitive articulate knowledge. So in total, we find 14 types of knowledge. Avadhi Gyan comes under the extrasensory knowledge, and there is very much detailed discussion in the different scriptures of Jainism, and especially in the Sutra, you can find very detailed about it, this particular extrasensory knowledge, which is called Avadhi Gyan. And in the language of science, we can say clairvoyance. Though Avadhi Gyan is a higher and superior in comparison to clairvoyance, but to understand just what Avadhi Gyan is, and that's why we can say that it is a kind of clairvoyance. So clairvoyance is the knowledge which is dependent on the self alone and takes stock of material substances as its objects. It is of two types. One is bhav pratyay and other one is kshav pashmik. It means one can get this clairvoyance knowledge by birth, and one can also get this knowledge by practicing some spiritual things. So that comes under the second category. And this type of extrasensory knowledge is obtained by the purity, inner purity, the purity of thoughts and emotions, and also purity of conduct. So these are two main causes of generating such kind of knowledge in us, and that is not easy to common people. Those who are practicing spirituality and rigorous ethical conduct, they can get this kind of extrasensory knowledge very easily. But those divine beings who are in heaven or hellish beings, they get this kind of knowledge by birth because of the environment in which they take birth. So these are two, and there are so many other different types of clairvoyance. One is called Deshavadhi, Paramavadhi, Sarvavadhi, Ekshatra, and Ekshatra. So they have also some specialty depending on the distance to which they are able to see the things. So Deshavadhi can know the things in the universe, which are found in the universe, inside the universe. Paramavadhi can see something beyond the universe. Saravavadhi can see many universe beyond the universe. So in this way, they have different capacities and to see the things at distance, and that's why they are divided into different categories. Now we would see that there is mind reading knowledge. Mind reading knowledge has capacity to know that, to have the direct access to the thoughts of others, and that is possible. And right now we know about the telepathy, how telepathy gives knowledge of others' mind, what others are thinking. We can easily know through telepathy. Similarly, we can know, we can have direct access to the mental images and thoughts of others' mind through mind reading knowledge. So this mind reading knowledge is also two types. One is simple and other one is complex. Complex can go into very detail of our mental images and mental thoughts, while Riju, the simple one, can know only what we are thinking in general. Keval Gyan, that is called omniscience. This is the highest development of our consciousness, in which we are able to see each and every reality of the universe or beyond the universe. Whatever is existing in any form, in any status, we can see through this particular knowledge. So all physical and non-physical realities with all their modes can be easily accessible to this kind of highest knowledge, which is known as perfect knowledge or divine knowledge or super consciousness. So this knowledge is also again of two types. One is called Bhavastha Keval Gyan and the other one is Siddha Keval Gyan. So in Hindu tradition, we find the concept of Jivan Mukti. And in Buddhism, we find the concept of Bodhisattva. So these people must have such kind of Keval Gyan, the perfect knowledge through which they can know each and every reality. And they can see the past, present, and future also. And Siddha Keval Gyan is the knowledge or consciousness, highest consciousness, which is found in the liberated souls after renouncing this world, after becoming free from the circle of births and deaths and physical body. Now we can see, just I have 1 minute, the knowledge which we are getting through these different types of cognitive theories. Among them, we have seen that omniscience is the highest knowledge, or we can say super consciousness or highest development of our consciousness. And it has so much capacities or qualities that it can see each and everything. So I'm not going into very detail about it. Just there are certain theories and discussions about the omniscience, how it functions. And there are three views in Jain tradition, and especially there are three main texts which discuss about the function of Keval Gyan, how it functions. So there are two types of knowledge. One is Keval Gyan, which is called omniscience, and there is another knowledge which is called Keval Darshan, that is omniperception. These two knowledges are perfect in themselves and they are fullest development of our consciousness. But it is said that whether Keval Gyan and Keval Darshan both work together or they work one after another. And there are three special theories regarding this. One is called a sequential function, other one was called integrated function, and a third one is called a simultaneous function. So there is Acharya Manal-Paryaya, who was in 11th century. He said that both Keval Gyan and Keval Darshan work together and not one after another. But Acharya Siddha Sen has said that no, they are not different actually. They are one and not two things after liberation or after getting perfection. And the Acharya Janapatra Gani, he said that though they are fully developed state of our consciousness, yet they work one after another and not together. So in this way, we find there are three types of opinions or views regarding the function of our omniscience and omniperception. And there are so many other things which we can discuss about the structure of consciousness, how this knowledge is structured in our soul. So we find that there are so many other different theories regarding the structure of our consciousness at different levels. So we find that consciousness, when consciousness is fully developed as omniscience, then it is found in every unit of our soul. It means that the soul is having this kind of knowledge in its every part. So every part of our soul is awakened, fully developed in this state. So we cannot say that this knowledge is found in particular part and not in other part. It is everywhere, anywhere, and from any part of conscious soul, you can have access of reality in its totality. So this kind of capacity is found in each and every unit of soul, and the soul is fully awakened, fully developed in this state. But five senses, when we talk of sensory knowledge, then we find that all the senses, the sensory knowledge have different structure in our different body. So the ear perception, under the perceptual cognition, we find five types of sensory knowledges, and all the senses have different structures and different position in our different places in our body where they are situated, and from that particular part or through that particular part only we can have the access of particular things through these kind of knowledges. So these five types of knowledges have different perceptual, or especially the sensory knowledges, have different structures in our different parts of our body. Then we would see clairvoyance, Avadhi Gyan. It has also some structures. And it is said in the scriptures that if we get right knowledge, right type of clairvoyance knowledge, then we must have some auspicious symbols like Shankh or 7 chakras, upper side of our navels. We can find such auspicious symbols in our body, and through which this knowledge can work. And if somebody has wrong knowledge, wrong clairvoyance, then he must have some inauspicious symbols or structures in his body below the navel. So these kind of structures are also mentioned in Shatkhandagam and also in some scriptures. And mind reading knowledge, the structure of mind reading knowledge, you can see that how our consciousness can go to reach to the mind of others and can have direct access to the thoughts or mental images of others. Now, just I want to conclude here because I have taken 5 minutes more. Here it is said that all different knowledges, we have seen 5 types of knowledge: perceptual cognition, articulate knowledge, clairvoyance, mind reading, and omniscience. But they have also very much differences of capacities among themselves. And you can find that they have different capacities to access the substances, the entities. So they have different capacities to access the realities in different times and different space, how far and how much they can see. So these different types of capacities of all different 5 types of knowledges have been mentioned in scripture, Nandi Sutra. Because of the time limitation, I'm not going into it very deep in detail, but you can see that all types of knowledge have different types of capacities, and they have very much power to know the realities. There are 3 types of wrong knowledge we have already discussed. And the last, I want to say that there are certain riddhis which have been mentioned in Jain scriptures, and through those riddhis we can develop some extraordinary knowledge remaining in the what we say then is in the present state, we can develop such extraordinary or mystical powers of knowing something which is not accessible to common living beings. So the Bij Buddhi, Kost Buddhi, Padanusari Buddhi, Pratyek Buddha, Swam Buddha, Bodh, Bodhit. So these different types of riddhis can be developed even by common people and can get enormous knowledge about the realities which are not easily accessible to a common living being. So I have said just that how far we can know, how much we can know, what kind of capacities we have. And these are all different functions of one and the same consciousness. So our consciousness has enormous power or unlimited power of knowledge. And if we can use that knowledge, we can know many things or more, or can say all things of the universe without going into any school or college. These capacities are inside, but they need to develop in a proper way. And for that, we have to understand some ethical, some spiritual practices too, because some extraordinary knowledges are not received or developed in some school or colleges, but they can be developed by practicing particular meditations or by following some spiritual rigorous ethical rules. So this is the things which I have discussed today, and might be I have taken almost all time. If somebody has any questions, they can ask.
श्रोताओं से निवेदन है, किसी के मन में यदि कोई प्रश्न है तो आप पूछ सकते हैं। हाँ जी, एक योगेश शाह का हैंड रेज हुआ है, इनको अनम्यूट करवाएं। हाँ जी,
हेलो।
हाँ जी,
हाँ, जय जिनेंद्र समनी जी, बहुत अच्छा प्रेजेंटेशन रहा आपका। मेरा एक प्रश्न है, ये जो आपने स्मेल का 9 योजन बताया है डिस्टेंस, ये उत्ते धानु से है कि परमांगुल से है, जो योजन का माप होता है उसमें? और जो हम बोलते हैं कि देवता 500 योजन तक धरती से स्मेल जाता है तो वो देख नहीं, वो आते नहीं यहाँ पे, तो वो मुझे समझ में नहीं आया वो कॉन्सेप्ट, यानी क्योंकि स्मेल का मैक्सिमम कैपेसिटी वो 9 योजन है।
Okay, so you have raised a very good question. वो उसमें ये है कि देवता की शक्ति तो हमसे भी ज्यादा होती है. It is said keeping the common human beings in view, but देवता can know much more than human beings. और इसमें भी ये बताया है कि 400-500 योजन दूर से भी अगर कोई चीज है तो उसको भी हमारे नोज जो है, हमारे टंग जो है, ये एक्सेस कर सकते हैं if they are coming by converting. It means सपोज किसी बगीचे में एक फूल खिला है और उसकी सुगंध है, वो सुगंध जब चलती है वहां से और हम तक पहुंचती है तो बीच में वो दूसरे जो एटम्स होते हैं उनको भी कन्वर्ट करती है, उसको भी जो है उसमें भी वो स्मेल जो है कन्वर्ट होती हुई आती है। तो वो सीधा डायरेक्ट मूल जो ओरिजिनल हमारे एटम्स ऑफ सुगंध के हैं वो हमारे तक ना पहुंच पाए, किंतु उनके द्वारा जो वासित होते हैं, कन्वर्टेड होते हैं, they can reach to us, and in that state we can know the smell from even 400 or 500 yojans. Even common man can know.
अच्छा, यानी इसका मतलब कि हमारे धरती से, यानी जो ये है यहाँ से कन्वर्ट होते होते 500 योजन तक वो स्मेल जाती है।
Yes, yeah.
ओके जी।
It is not easy to come the original atoms to us from such long distance. So by converting, they can reach to us.
बट इसमें मैक्सिमम पावर जो स्मेल का वो 9 योजन ही है, तो है ना?
हाँ, वो एक फिक्स लिमिट बता दी है कि 9 योजन तक हम जो है जनरली देख सकते हैं, अगर अपनी सेंसेस को हम डेवलप करें और अपनी कॉन्शियसनेस को इतना ट्रांसपेरेंट बनाए तो वो वहां तक एक्सेस कर सकती है, किंतु अगर वो कन्वर्ट होकर के आ रही है तो उससे आगे की लॉन्ग डिस्टेंस के से भी आप उस चीज को एक्सेस कर सकते हैं।
धन्यवाद।
So only there is one question.
Now, next question, Jaswant ji. Jaswant ji, आपका question बताइए.
Mathan Vandami,
हाँ.
just away from Vapi,
Mm-hmm.
just a little different opinion regarding Manal-Paryaya Jñana. This, according to me, it is not just mind reading, but it is much more beyond than that. Because simple mind reading, because mind reading is different from Manal-Paryaya Jñana. Manal-Paryaya Jñana is obtained by Muni on the 6th Gunasthanak. So that is a bit higher level. That is only my difference.
Yeah, it is named as Manal-Paryaya. It means mind, mental thoughts or mental images. So it has the capacity to access the mental images or mental thoughts. So by name itself is indicating that it is related to mind.
Very true. But the capacity.
Yeah, the capacity in we have seen that there are two types of mind
Rujumati
reading
and
knowledge. One
Vipulmati.
is a simple and other one is complex. So in complex, you can go into detail of all the different mental images of the mind of other people. But where is the problem here? It is a very superior and very higher category of knowledge.
Next question है गौरव जी की ओर से.
Yes.
साध्वी जी को वंदामी, सभी को जय जनेन. Sadhvi ji, my question is, at what stages we can invoke these different kind of consciousness levels? Is it always in an order? Can they be parallel? Can they be together? How does that work?
So it is very good question. It is not necessary that you have to go one after another. They can be parallel developed, but there are certain, it is not necessary that all the 5 types are knowledge developed in all living beings. Sometimes there are 3 types of knowledge only. One is Mati, Shuddha and the Kevala. Avadhi and Manal-Paryaya, it is not necessary for all living beings, but they can also be developed by some rigorous ethical practices. So they can, at a time, either there will be 3 knowledge, 2 knowledge, 3 knowledge, 4 knowledge. And if there is omniscience, then there will be only 1 knowledge and not all the other 4. They will merge into Kevala Jnana. So Kevala Jnana covers all different other knowledge, lower knowledges. So when there is omniscience, then there is no need of other knowledges. So either there maximum there can be 4 knowledge or minimum there can be 1 knowledge. Okay. And one can develop all the 4, 5 together. There is no problem.
Thank you.
Yes.
अभी बहुत बहुत आभार आपका. और आपने बताया कि सॉल इज मेन सोर्स ऑफ नॉलेज, मतलब मति श्रुतावधि मनोप्रिय ज्ञान के बारे में और केवल ज्ञान के बारे में आपने बहुत सुंदर विश्लेषण किया. और इसके लिए आपके धन्यवाद ज्ञापन के लिए मैं अब सुश्री वर्षा जी से निवेदन करूंगा कि वे आपका धन्यवाद ज्ञापन करें. वर्षा जी.
मथेनंग वंदामी चैतन्य प्रज्ञा जी. यहाँ पे तो बजे हैं 6:30 करीबन आसपास. आपके यहाँ कितने बजे हैं?
यहाँ करीबन 8:30 बज रहे हैं.
ओके.
सुबह के 8:30.
सुबह के.
हाँ, 7:30 बजे आपका लेक्चर टाइम था यहाँ के हिसाब से और 8:30 जो है अभी हो गए.
सेहत वगैरह अच्छे हैं आपके?
हाँ बिल्कुल बढ़िया है.
यहाँ आपने means you have given a very enlightened lecture. You had said that how religious practice, various religious practices revolves around consciousness. You have said that, and then you have reflected on Chaitana, means the terms that Jainism use for consciousness as Chaitana, Upayoga, Jnana. In these 3 terms consciousness is reflected, and how the relation of soul and consciousness. So one works as a substance and other works as a quality. And then you reflected that je aya se vinaya se aya. That means consciousness itself you have reflected is a soul. Or indirectly, you mean to say that consciousness is also a soul. Consciousness is also knowledge. Knowledge and consciousness work together. So in that sense, you also segregated that it is sagara upayoga. So from the functional point of view, reflected that consciousness is also from the functional point of view, it is reflected as upayoga. So upayoga is termed as sagara and anagara. One is sakar with form and one is without form. And then you distinguished between Paśyatā and Upayoga. So Paśyatā is much higher than the Upayoga. Then you reflected on the power of senses. Means each sensory knowledge, it is very powerful, but we are not aware of that such power of the senses. And then you reflected on how to develop the consciousness. So it was very, your lecture was very inspiring. And it is said that around the world, if we go outside world, it takes at least 80 days. That saying is also that around the world, it takes about 80 days. So of course, it's so many days it takes to go around the world. But then within 1 hour, you have taken us inside the world. It is very, I should say, very nice that your lecture, you have very lucid, in a lucid way, you have explained. And then I thank you for whatever this informative lecture that you have given. And then I thank our director of Dharma studies, who is a constant source of inspiration to us. And she constantly inspires us at every level. She also
no need, Varsha. This is our program. Please, please, yeah.
And then I thank our HOD, Jain Center, Dr. SP Jain, who is also equally enthusiastic in the organization of the seminars and other programs. And I also thank the technical side, the people who are involved in the technical side. And I also thank all the people who, as in today's, who have listened to the lecture. Maybe they must have not, every part of it, they must have not understood, or they must have not even agreed to it. But I thank everyone who has cooperated, who has given, who have listened, who have given that valuable time. And I thank everyone, each and everyone I thank. So I hand over now to our sir, SP Jain sir.
धन्यवाद। अभी हमारे डायरेक्टर धर्मा स्टडी की अनुमति लेते हुए अब इस प्रोग्राम को समापन किया जा रहा है, और आप सबको यही बताना है कि अब समापन हो रहा है। ठीक है, धन्यवाद सभी का। हाँ जी, जय जिनेंद्र, सभी को जय जिनेंद्र।
Thanks to all the organizers and the audience who were listening to the lecture with full attention.
Thank you.
So yeah, there are so many facts and figures, and we cannot go into detail in one lecture or in 1 hour, because each theory will take 1 hour actually.
Yes.
When we try to understand fully. So it may be that there are certain things that may not be clear just at outset, without going into detailed discussion. So hopefully it is good
Thank you.
to see all of you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
नमस्ते. नमस्ते.
Namaste.
हाँ जी, इस
नमस्ते.
मीटिंग को अभी समाप्त किया जा रहा है. ठीक.